in the short range, he can separate on those slants. You get him the ball. He's a very strong runner after the catch, very tough physical wide receiver, and I like how he complements the other weapons in that unit. But take into account what they did with the rest of the draft too.
John McMullen, Jody, McDonald, your Mac Birds 365 guys. Lucky enough to get the insights again from Ian Cummings from Pro Football Network, who was good enough to jump on with us a couple times before the draft. He does so here the Monday thereafter. Ian, we're going to get your thoughts on the entire draft, but first things first, Birds. Johnny and I just broke it down for the last 20 minutes. Love what they did in the first 3 rounds. Kept themselves a little underwhelmed at the back end because of the cost to get the guys that they got in the 4th round. Putting it all together, Eagles draft, including A.J. Brown. And yes, I do count that as part of the draft. How much did they improve their football team over the last couple of days?
Yeah, they improved a lot, and you have to consider that as part of the draft, the A.J. Brown acquisition, because he's such a talented player and you use draft capital to get him. But, that's a strong receiver who I think fits pretty well with Jalen Hurts. You can in the short range, you can separate on those slants, you get him the ball. He's a very strong runner after the catch, very tough physical wide receiver, and I like how he complements the other weapons in that unit. But take into account what they did with the rest of the draft too. Jordan Davis, I talked about it in an article right after they drafted him. Like, he was a little bit lower on my board just because I don't think he's an independent pass rusher right now. But I love the fit with the Eagles because what he can do, occupy blocks, free up other defensive linemen. And when you're using those 3-4 fronts, those odd fronts, you can divert more personnel to the back end, which can help your secondary as well. So I think there's a symbiotic, cohesive relationship that you can big gain from there. Cameron Jurgens, I loved that pick. I think he can succeed Jason Kelsey in the future. He's got the athletic traits for sure. He's a mauler. He's pretty physical. He's got to improve his play strength, but I do think, give him a year to sit behind him and he could be ready to go in a year or two. And then Nakobe Dean, man, that was a value pick in the 3rd round. We know that he dropped because of medicals, but he was a 1st-round prospect for a lot of people. He was a fringe 1st-round guy on my board, and they got him at that point. I really think he can be that glue guy for that linebacker core that they need. He can process, he can communicate, he can get guys in space, but he's also a very proactive playmaker, very explosive, very physical, even for his size, a little bit undersized, but he comes in like a missile when he's blitzing, man. So I love that pick. And then the late round picks, a little underwhelming. And obviously, like you said, they did have to trade 1 pick away for the A.J. Brown deal. But I do like the guys that they got on day 3. Kyron Johnson in particular is one that I'm very intrigued to see how they use him. I would have preferred they go corner or safety at some point, but that's something I can get past because I think you accomplished a lot with those first 3 rounds.
Well, now they did go corner after the draft, and obviously that's not nearly as exciting for fans. But if you look at some of the consensus grades, they got Josh Joby, where's it, Job? You tell me, Ian, from Alabama. They were able to get Mario Goodrich from Clemson, and 3rd kid, I think Blackwell from Duke. A lot of day 3 grades on at least Job. What him specifically, and if you have any information on those other corners for a team that is looking for help in the secondary, is that value in the undrafted process?
Oh, absolutely. And I think with this class in particular, because of the COVID year, seeing a lot of people come back, it was a much deeper class. And so we saw some good players that had draftable grades kind of going undrafted. And, you had the opportunity to sign them there. I really like Josh Jobe and Mario Goodrich in that range. I think that Jobe, for me, the one thing, he was always pretty physical and a little over physical at times. And he often relied on it and drew a lot of penalties, kind of sloppy with his technique. Not the most fluid guy, but he's long. Again, he's physical. I'd rather have an over tenacious corner who I can kind of teach to hone that physicality than a guy who's naturally passive, because that can be a little harder to teach. So he's got that alpha mentality, that chip on his shoulder, which I absolutely love. And I think that you could teach him to kind of hone his traits a little bit because he's got the length, he's got the ball skills. With Goodrich, not quite as long and not super fluid. I think Andrew Booth was considerably more athletic than him, but Goodrich is still a pretty good athlete. He's got pretty good size. The one thing that I love about his game is that he comes downhill and runs support. He's very physical there, very proactive. And again, that kind of shows up at the catch point where he's willing to kind of get in the receiver's grill and make those plays. So I think those are 2 guys that have the physical traits, and Blackwell as well. He tested very well at his pro day. I can't remember the exact numbers.
I know he ran well. It was
4.3 I think it was in the 4.3. So he's another guy who's got that size, speed, athleticism. You like to think, if he gets into an NFL camp and has some time to hone his traits, maybe he sticks around as well. So I think for what they weren't able to do in the NFL draft, getting improving the corner position, I think they kind of compensated for that, as you said, with that undrafted free agent pool.
All right, get your safety grades out. Got to go down the little list a bit because we're talking about undrafted again. What did your read on Reed Blankenship look like from Middle Tennessee State, who was the big Eagle edition at safety in the undrafted free agent category?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. He's an interesting one. I know he's got a lot of starting experience from Mid-Tennessee State. I know he tested pretty well athletically, not a top-end speed guy, but has that explosiveness that you want to play too high, maybe come into the box a little bit. He's got a pretty strong frame. So I look at him, he's got a pretty well-rounded profile. So I think as long as he holds up, athletically against these NFL athletes, there's a good chance that maybe he sticks around. I think with his ability to come downhill and tackle, can have a high floor as a special teamer right away, and that might be how he makes the roster initially. But with his experience and his athleticism, I could see him maybe carving out a role in the future, maybe 1 to 2 to 3 years down the road. I think he's got the physical talent for sure. And, he's not completely raw from the mental side. Obviously, having that experience, he was able to kind of build up that recognition, that intelligence. And I think, honestly, he was one of the more underrated safeties in the draft. With how deep this draft was, it's not super surprising to me that he went undrafted, but he could be one of those guys where we look down the road and, one of those safeties who, they start undrafted, they start as a special teamer, kind of work their way up and eventually, take meaningful snaps on defense. So I thought of all things considered, and I know the Eagles tried to get Marquise Bell from Florida A&M before he went to the Cowboys as well. That would have been an excellent undrafted free agent signing as well. But I think Blankenship is a pretty good consolation prize because he's got the experience, he's got the athleticism, all the tools that you need to, I think, stick around and eventually kind of grow into that bigger role.
See, there you go, Jody. The Eagles spent a lot of money on undrafted free agents.
Time out, Philadelphia. How is experience at Middle Tennessee State considered a positive?
It's better than no experience.
That sounds like a guy who had to stick around for 5 years just to merit being thought about by an NFL team. That's a negative, not a positive.
It's better than not playing at Middle Tennessee State. Look at it that way. Yeah, a lot of
I'll sit on the fence in this one. I do think, on one hand, you'd like him to kind of take the leap up, but hey, all football experience is good experience. Whether if you're in the heat of the moment, no matter what.
It is. Exactly. But I mean, if you look at, we were talking before, some of the 2 6-round picks, Kyron Johnson, Grant Calcaterra. At that point, you do have a significant need at corner or safety. I was just trying to point out, you take the best player at that point. And then in undrafted free agency, they were kind of able to make up for it because if you take a Josh Jobe in the 6th round, nobody's going to blink.
Yeah, for sure. It's all about the value.
Yeah. I don't know about Blankenship. You would know better than me, but if he were a 6th round pick, I don't know if people would go crazy. So, if you're able to get these players after the draft, it's interesting how pedigree matters so much to people. If you're a draft choice versus an undrafted kid, but we'll see how that shakes out. I want to get back to the players that the fans are more excited about. And it starts at the top. You mentioned a little bit, but I want to dive deeper with you, Ian, with Jordan Davis, because I'm with you. He affects so many different things, and particularly for this team, because Jonathan Gannon told me specifically, I mean, they need a 0 technique. They need a 1 technique. They need somebody that can take on 2 blockers and open up things for the other defensive linemen. Then you put on the Georgia tape and you watch him, and you watch immediately Nakobe Dean making all those plays, and you look, who's in front of him taking up 2 blockers a lot of the time is Jordan Davis. And you mentioned the things you can do in coverage and how that helps. Kind of talk about how those 3 bits come together with a player like Jordan Davis.
Yeah, so obviously, you talk about what he can do for a defense. I think that's the most important thing to consider here because as we've said, and one reason that he graded a little bit lower for me is that when you look at how he creates independently as a pass rusher, it's not quite there yet. The pad level can be a little tough to regulate for him being as big as he is. I mean, 6'6", 340. There's going to be some issues there for sure. And the hand usage still kind of coming along. So as a, independent player in that phase, that bumped him down a little bit. But you look at what he can do already. All right. This guy's an elite run defender already. He's an elite 2-gapper already. You put him right at the 0 tech, like you said, he can occupy that block. He can cover both gaps, and he's got the play strength to shift from one gap to another in rapid succession, close those lanes before they open. So that ability in itself that upper body torque, the elite play strength, and power is just insane with this guy. But then as a pass rusher too, not necessarily an independent pass rusher, but being able to take on two blockers, because you're not stopping him with one. He's not quite the refined pass rushing threat right now, but it's just tough to stop a guy that big, that athletic one-on-one, even if he's not the most refined player. And we know there's ways that he can kind of improve. Like he ran in the 4.7s at 6'6", 340. He doesn't quite channel that athleticism super effectively right now. But again, I mean, if you're one-on-one with this guy, especially with a center, which they're usually considerably smaller than he is, right? It's going to be tough to hold him back with that straight line power that he has, with his long arms, with that explosiveness. So usually you're going to have two blockers on him. So that can free up the three tech for one-on-one opportunities. I love it because I think, if you have a three-man front as well, you look at Nakobe Dean. This was a guy who produced a lot. I think he was Georgia's leading sack producer for a while on that defense. With all the talent that they had, he was the leading sacker. You know why? Because Jordan Davis clearing those passes and allowing Nakobe Dean to rush straight through and get to the quarterback with that elite explosive burst that he has. And when he encounters blockers too, like the running back trying to chip him, he's very physical. I know he's a little undersized, and that may have played a hand in his descent a little bit, along with the medicals, but he plays a lot bigger than his frame. He's like an energized, he's like a ball of energy out there. He's just always, giving 100%, being super physical and exerting that physicality on top of that speed that he has. And I think that with the Eagles, you can get creative too. Kyron Johnson is another player, right? I mean, you got a three-man front. Let's say you got Jordan Davis, Milton Williams, Fletcher Cox, and then you can put Kyron out on the outside. He stunts inside. He's got elite closing burst too. And at the Senior Bowl, we saw him convert speed to power so well. So he can get right into the
he gave Trevor Penning fits. Yeah. Everybody was talking about it.
Exactly.
Who's a first-round pick.
This is a guy who's 6 foot, 230, giving fits to a guy who's, 6'7", 330, right? So 100 pounds on the guy. And Kyron Johnson is moving him back and making him submit. So it was a lot of fun to watch. But you look at Kyron Johnson, I think that's exactly the way to use him. He's got the athleticism to work in space, but he's got the speed to power too, where he can pack a punch and he can pave open those lanes. And then maybe Nakobe Dean coming on the twist stunt behind him. I mean, it's I'm getting goosebumps talking about it. I think Jonathan Gannon, being a creative defensive coordinator, he would too. I think Jordan Davis, well, he's not the most exciting player on his own, just his presence, his pure presence opens you up to so many different things.
I want to jump back over to the offense. Good to know Jonathan Gannon's going to have these bullets to fire this year with the Eagles in their front seven. Eagles in the second round took Cameron Jurgens. We talked about leading up to the draft. Tony Pauline told me that he was the best center in the draft, better than Linderbaum. There were good rumors going around. The Eagles really liked him. Well, they did. They took him in the second round. He is certainly the heir apparent to Jason Kelce at center. But last year they took Dickerson, who was going to be the heir apparent to Jason Kelce at center. And then the Eagles guards started dropping like flies, and they moved him out. And damn if he didn't do a phenomenal job at guard for the Eagles, and now projects to be at the guard position for the next decade or so. What happens if another Eagle guard goes down this year? And Kelce's perfectly fine at center, and they look at Jurgens standing there and going, well, he's an actual better football player than the guys we might be trying to plug in. If they need him at right or left guard because of injury purposes, you think they'll move Jurgens? Is he capable of being moved? Can he do what Dickerson did last year and flex out and hold down the fort? Or do you think they're just going to have him redshirt this year behind Kelce?
That's an interesting question. And, off the top of my head, I'd say I'm not sure. Maybe we'll see. I know he played center for pretty much his entire career at Nebraska, but he came over as a tight end. He was a tight end. He was a lead blocker in high school at times too. So he came over from that background, just, having that moving ability. You can move him around, let him kind of lead the running back and kind of use him as that piece, to now at Nebraska being that fulcrum of the offensive line. That was pretty much the role that he maintained for his entire tenure at Nebraska. Now, can he play guard? I don't want to rule it out, because one thing that, encouraged me was at the NFL Combine. I know in college he was, I think, around 290. He came in over 300 at the NFL Combine and still retained the insane athleticism that he does have. So I think there is a scenario where you can move him to guard. I think you take some lumps there initially because he is a little bit smaller than your traditional guard. And that's one reason why Landon Dickerson, had that positional flexibility, is because he's a big dude. He's a big dude. He's a physical dude. Jurgens isn't like any of these guys that you look at. If you stand next to them, they're not small, right? But Jurgens, comparing him to the average guard, might be a little undersized, the frame a little more, lean, a little more compact than you're used to seeing. And the arms are a little bit shorter. I could see that impacting him against those defensive tackles on the outside, at 3-4 eye tech. So, I think it's something that could impact him, but he's got he's an insane athlete. I mean, I think he had a 1.7 10-yard split, which is just absurd for a center. This guy's accelerating very quickly off the line. He's such an effortless mover in space. And, as a moving blocker, as a lead blocker out in open field, he can maul guys. He can, barrel through. And I love that part of his game. So I think, you could put him there potentially. And I love that he's in a offensive line room with Jason Kelce, with other experienced veterans, because I do think, it's a great scenario for him to learn over the next year. If you need to put him in there, I won't rule it out. I'll say he's probably more natural as a center, but I do think the elite athleticism can open a lot of doors for you.
All right, Andy, you're probably going to be doing this too much over the coming week. And it's silly, so I'm going to put that caveat on there. But we got to talk winners and losers overall with the NFL draft. From my perspective, obviously in the first round, the New York Giants added significant talent. They should have when you have 2 top 10 picks. Jody's New York Jets did a heck of a job, and they should have with 2 top 10 picks and then getting Jermaine Johnson as well. I got to tell you, I was at the NovaCare complex all weekend, and every time I looked up, the Baltimore Ravens were taking another good player. I don't know what it is about that team, but I call them the smartest team in the NFL. They just make good decisions. 4th round, I think they had the half of the 4th round, and they managed to get good players. Your thoughts on the Ravens and the best drafts as a whole?
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned winners and losers, because the first team that popped in my head was the Ravens. I mean, if you were going to ask me which team to choose, that's what it would have been. I think the Ravens really nailed the entire draft. I think looking at their haul, as a whole, first off in round 1, getting Kyle Hamilton at 14, Tyler Linderbaum at 25, I do think that Hamilton, that's a perfect fit for him, because they signed Marcus Williams in free agency. He's that rangy center fielder. You can bring him up top and cover one, but then at the same time, Hamilton, he can play too high. He can go into the box, 6'4", 220, very explosive, very physical. He's got the instincts. So I love the fit there. And I think that if there's any, situation where Hamilton's physical tools can be maximized, I think Baltimore's it. Now, Linderbaum, putting him at center, I love that as well. I think they had Patrick McCarry kind of penciled in there, but McCarry's got that positional versatility. You can move him wherever you need him to go, and he can be a good player. And they got Falele at right tackle later on, which I think in round 4 is very good value. He's the guy who's got absurd size. You can mold him up a little bit. So I loved that part of their draft. And then on day 2, getting Travis Jones, getting David Ajabo. I mean, those guys are wreckers. I know we were talking about Travis Jones before the draft, and I love Jordan Davis and Travis Jones, both of them, for what they offer. But my preference, simply because of the independent pass rushing upside, I'd almost prefer Travis Jones in round 2 to Jordan Davis in round 1, because Travis Jones, he's got the play strength, he's got the size, he can 2-gap, he can anchor guys, but he's also a very good pass rusher with that explosiveness, that lateral agility, the violent hands. So I think for the Baltimore Ravens in particular, using those hybrid fronts, I really love what Jones can do, not just freeing up other defenders, but playing for himself as well and creating pressure for himself. And then David Ajabo, with the Achilles injury, might not be available right away, but, has that upside that I'd be willing to bank on. I think in a year, him opposite Adave Owa could be an absolutely menacing edge rushing duo. So I love that fit as well. Even around 4, like you said, they got some very good value deals. Jalen Armour-Davis, a corner from Alabama, was one guy that I was a big fan of, and I had the chance to interview him earlier in the cycle, and he really impressed me. He's a very technically sound, technically oriented corner. You ask him about his technique and what goes into it, he gives you a long paragraph answer, talking about the little details and stuff. So you can tell that his mind is focused on football, and he's very detail oriented in that sense. But you watch the tape too. He's 6'1". He can run a 4.39. He's improving as a playmaker. So, I think he's exactly the type of corner that the Ravens can maximize and eventually have him break out as a starter. Isaiah Likely, Charlie Kolar, Tyler Beatty, a lot of value deals for the Ravens on that front. So if I had to pick an all-out winner, just above everyone else, it would probably be the Ravens. But, some of the teams that you mentioned, I think the Jets especially, they only had, round picks in the first 4 rounds. But I think they did a great job with what they had, getting Garrett Wilson, Ahmad Gardner, Jermaine Johnson. Jermaine Johnson was a top 10 player on my board. He fell to 26 and they got him. So I think he's probably the most well-rounded edge rusher in this draft. And so you look at what he can do for them there. Absolutely a huge fan of that. Breece Hall, a great compliment to Michael Carter in round 2. And then Jeremy Ruckert later on. I know they had a few other guys as well. So I'm a big fan of what the Jets were able to do with what they had. You know, I probably would have traded back into rounds 5 through 7, tried to get a couple more guys just because I love draft picks. It's a problem that I have, but you know, I do think overall, I think they had a very good draft, and I was a big fan of what they added, especially in those first 2 rounds.
All right, I want to ask you about 2 specific teams, and there's a reason for both of them. The first is the Jacksonville Jaguars, who John from time to time likes to pimp a little bit because he's tight with their head of player personnel, the owner's son. That's Doug Peterson's new team, and apparently they've got a lot of faith in Doug because they didn't draft any offense. They drafted one offensive player, a running back, and that's it. Other than that, they built up their defense, and I think they got some serious talent on their defense. When you got the first overall pick, you know you're adding a potential superstar type player. How would you grade the Jaguars draft?
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation to have. And I think, as you said, a lot of it kind of depends on what happens with Trayvon Walker at number 1 overall. Obviously, you know, a very talented player. When you run a 4.51 at 6'5", 271 with 35-inch arms, I mean, that's going to give you a lot right there. The problem is, you know, the hand usage needs a lot of refinement. He doesn't quite have the operational refinement that you'd expect from a number 1 pick. Now, having said that, I do think, you know, he's already a very good run defender with his power capacity, his ability to anchor and wrench guys down, you know, deconstruct blocks. And as a pass rusher too, you know, while he might not be able to independently create on his own off the edge right now, he can be that, you know, that guy that you just throw around to different alignments because he can play just about anywhere. And that straight line power is devastating for offensive linemen. So I love the potential there. And if it was down to him or Aiden Hutchinson, I would go with Trayvon Walker just because I think the ceiling is a lot higher there. So I think if you can coach him up, he can be a very good player. Now, where else they got, you know, I think Devin Lloyd later in round 1 was a big fan of that move to trade up for him because he was one of my top linebackers, along with Chad Muma, who they also got later on. You know, so I think getting my top 2 linebackers personally, both guys with length, you know, instincts, athleticism. I do think Muma is a little bit better deconstructing blocks and stacking and shedding an open field, but both guys have that explosiveness in the second level where they can make plays. You know, both very instinctive players. So them playing alongside each other, and then Foyesade Oluokun, you know, at linebacker at the other spot for Jacksonville. Love what they got there. You know, I think that was a good pick. They also got Luke Fortner at center at the top of round 3, and I think that was a pretty good pick. I was late getting to Fortner on tape. I got to him in late March, I think, but I was very impressed with what he has to offer. I think he ran, you know, a 10-yard split in the 1.7s, so he's got good athleticism. But you watch him on tape, you know, he's got very good knee bend. He's got very good natural leverage, tight hands. You know, he's got good hand replacement. So when you have a center, you always want to see them working those hands to kind of stimmy power rushes. And I think Fortner does a good job of that. Great hip flexibility to, you know, shift from one gap to the other and seal off lanes for running backs. So, you know, I do think after Brandon Linder retired, you know, they do have a potential need there. They like Tyler Shatley, but I think getting Fortner in there, and he's not just a center too, he's played guard before. So having that interior versatility at the very least, that depth, I think was a good move for the Jaguars. So overall, in the first 3 rounds, I thought they did a very good job. I think also, you know, they got Snoop Connor, Gregory Jr., Monterique Brown on day 3. So, you know, some other pretty solid picks. I'd probably give it a B+, right? I think we need to see how Trayvon Walker develops, right? And I wasn't, you know, head over heels for the day 3 picks. I liked them. I didn't love them. But those picks kind of carry a little less weight. Usually you're trying to hit a home run with your early round picks. And I do think they did a very good job, especially, you know, Trayvon Walker, the upside kind of gives him a little bit of a boost, right? You got to see how he performs, but just getting that guy in your room can be a very big boost for you. And then at linebacker, getting Devin Lloyd and Chad Muma, that can be a crazy second level unit that I'm very excited to see.
Watch out for Gregory Jr. from Ochita Baptist. That was one of
sir.
our buddy Rick Zaratella's guys. Loved him. Had him in his all-star game out in the left coast and talked him up a blue streak. And sure enough, he went in the 6th round. So I do like the Jags draft a lot. I'm with you. I think it was one of the top 4 or 5 drafts overall. Top heavy on defense. And if I'm Trevor Lawrence, I'm going, wait. You realize you used the first overall pick on me, right? You got me no offensive weapons, but I do like what they did. How about the other ex-Eagle coach? I really like what the Chiefs did too. Do you like the Chiefs draft this year? What kind of grade would you throw on it?
Yeah, their draft was pretty interesting. And I think the first round, obviously, Trent McDuffie was the first pick. And that's one you got to think about a little bit, right? Because usually at the corner position, they like longer guys on the boundary. That's kind of Steve Spagnuolo's staple, right? His long, physical enforcer, right? Trent McDuffie, arms under 30 inches. So not something you typically expect there. But Trent McDuffie is a smart guy. This was a guy who in high school, he transferred to St. John Bosco before his final year. And by the time the season started, he was playing in the slot. He was taking on slot responsibilities. He was moving around, which when you're immediately arriving, just learning the scheme, that's very impressive. He picks up things very quickly. We saw that same thing at Washington. Right when he came in, true freshman, started over 10 games and was productive, right? So this is a guy, you can bring right in and you can move him around. So I could see them maybe using him in a similar way to Tyrann Mathieu. We've seen people say that he translates pretty well at safety in the slot. I think you can move McDuffie all around the field. He's got very good short area athleticism, very good explosiveness. He's a physical dude. He's willing to come downhill and tackle and run support. So I love the pick, and I think he can be that glue guy for a secondary that needs it after they lost Mathieu. Later on in round 1, getting George Karlaftis, I think, that was about where I would have had him. I think that's a pretty good value for him, getting that power rusher. He's got a 38-inch vertical. He doesn't always show that explosiveness off the line, but I do think, using that, he can kind of glean more with an NFL training program. He's got heavy hands. He's pretty powerful at the point of attack. So, I like that aspect of it. Going down to day 2, Skye Moore, one of my guys from Western Michigan. I'm very excited to see how they use him. He's a violent route runner if there was ever one. Those releases, he can get displacement so quickly with his movements, very explosive in the short ranges. I don't think he quite plays that 4.41 speed that he tested with, but again, I think he has enough speed where he can stretch open space, and he's an alpha. I mean, this guy plays tough. The ball comes his way, he's bringing it down, and he can get some run after catch yards too. Brian Cook was an interesting one from Cincinnati. I think he probably translates best as a box safety. I don't think he's that all-out versatile guy. But if you have a guy who can play cover 1, center fielder, bring Brian Cook down into the box in the slot, and he can be very physical. He's a very good tackler downhill. When the ball comes his way, he can make plays too. So I like that pick. I think if they know how to use it, and they do have a lot of mixing and matching pieces in that secondary where they can make it work. And then the last pick of day 2, Leo Chenal. That was a pick that I really liked for the value. He's around 6'3", 255. This guy's a brick house. I mean, he hits you very hard. He's more of a 2-down linebacker. He doesn't quite have the lateral agility that I would want for, to play on third downs, playing coverage consistently. But I do think, on those early downs, this is a guy, he's a homing missile in the box. I mean, he's super physical. He engages blockers with a ton of force, and he's very, very instinctive too. He knows how to use his short range explosiveness to surge through gaps and make tackles. So I think Leo Chenal, especially with Willie Gay and Nick Bolton, I think he complements those other linebackers very well. So I was a big fan of that. And then, elsewhere too, I think the Chiefs did pretty good on day 3. One pick that I was a very big fan of was Isaiah Pacheco later on, Rutgers running back. I think he's a very good athlete for his size, around 5'10", 5'11", 216 pounds, I think. So he's got a dense frame for sure. And you look at how he was used at Rutgers, sometimes motions, but mainly out of the backfield. But he's a fast guy. Once he gets into open space, very tough to catch. He accelerates quickly, and he can use that to kind of stretch spaces and kind of manipulate tackling angles. And he's pretty physical too. He can keep those legs churning through contact. So overall, I thought it was a very good draft for the Chiefs. They kind of nailed the first 2 days and then got some good value on day 3. I'm all for it.
Before we let you out of here, Ian, we got to get your thoughts on the NFC East as a whole besides the Eagles. But at Ian_Cummings_9, you see it right there on the screen. Follow Ian on Twitter. You can just listen to him. I always say for 5 minutes, you know what he's talking about. ProFootballNetwork.com. You can read him there. Interesting, the NFC East. You have Jerry Jones. He showed you his board. You had Tyler Smith at the top when they were up. The Commanders, we all knew they wanted a receiver, but they go down and get Jahan Dotson. That was interesting. And then the Giants obviously got tremendous help on both sides of the football. That's how the Eagles have been building their teams for years. And now the Giants, have Brandon Brown as Joe Schoen's assistant. So maybe there's some Eagles sort of flavor to the way they went about their top 10 picks. But your thoughts about the other NFC East teams?
Yeah, and I'll go really quickly for this because I know we got a lot of ground to cover for them. But Washington, the first one, I used to write for Washington, so I kind of have I'm a little closer to them, right? So I kind of watch, see what they're doing. And I was kind of up and down on their draft. Trading down, I liked getting the extra value. Mid-first round was a little high for Jahan Dotson for me. I love the player. I do think I want to see him get a little bit stronger. He's got a lighter frame. I want to see him against press a little more often. Didn't encounter press very much and didn't really succeed against it at Penn State. But he's explosive. He's got throttle control, very good vertical leaping ability, very good hands. So I think at the very least can be a Terry McLaurin type threat, very consistent. Just not sure if the dynamic upside is there in a physical NFL. Moving down the list, Fedarian Mathis was kind of a big reach for me in round 2. And I understand they had to add to the defensive line. I do like that Mathis is alignment versatile. He can 2-gap if you need him to, can play 1-tech, can play 3-tech. But I don't know. The elite athleticism isn't quite there with him. He's got good bursts, right? But not very agile laterally. Can be a little stiff to recover. He's got violent hands. He's got a hot motor. So I do think he's got a high floor. I'd rather shoot for the stars with another pick there. So I thought that was a pretty big reach, and I know they love Alabama defensive tackles, so that might have played a hand in it. I never liked helmet scouting, for better or worse. I think you got to stick to what the player offers, and I do think Mathis in round 3 or early round 4 would have been a good get, but round 2 was a little too high for me. Brian Robinson, though, round 3, and I get that they wanted to add a running back because Antonio Gibson, not quite that pure runner. The vision isn't always there with him. Brian Robinson was one of my guys. He was my RB3, so I do like that pick a lot. Physical, good footwork, good patience. He finishes downhill very well. He's got pretty underrated bursts too. So I think he's a pretty good player who could go on to be a solid starter for them. I realize I've talked about Washington for probably 3 minutes already, so I'll wrap it up here. But Sam Howell, I think, was a very good value pick in round 5. I didn't have a round 1 grade on him. I didn't have a round 1 grade on any quarterback in this class. But I think Sam Howell, he has some developmental tools getting behind Carson Wentz, and he can be a good player. So I'm interested to see how that tracks for them. But the Giants was another one. I thought they nailed the first round. Outside of the first round, maybe a few reaches in there. I think Cordell Flott on day 2 was a pretty big reach. He's pretty underweight for the NFL level. Not sure how he's going to deal with physicality. Joshua Ezuedu, I do like his potential for North Carolina. A slight reach for me. So I think those day 2 picks, slight reaches, but I think they did enough in round 1, getting Kayvon Thibodeau and Evan Neal, where I'm probably going to overlook a lot of that. And then on day 3, I thought they made some pretty good picks with their day 3 picks. I think if I can scroll down here, because I've got a lot of names. Yeah, Marcus McKeith and Darian Beavers in round 6 as well. I love the versatility that he provides at running at linebacker. So I like that for sure. And then the Cowboys, I think I wasn't head over heels for their draft either. Round 1 was a little too high for Tyler Smith. I like him. I like the upside for sure. I think he translates a little bit better at guard right away. If you're looking for him to start right away, the technique is pretty messy from him right now, but he's very physical, very athletic, very powerful. So the upside is there for sure. Sam Williams in round 2. Talent-wise, he's a round 2 guy. There's some off-field character stuff for him, but we've known the Cowboys are willing to take chances on that. So that was a pretty solid pick talent-wise. I think he's got to answer for some stuff off the field, but, at his max projection can be that disruptive edge that you're looking for. All the physical tools are there. Jalen Tolbert, round 3, another pick that I really liked. I do think that was the right value for him. Was a dominant producer in the Sun Belt at South Alabama. He's got great body control, great athleticism. I'd like to see him a little more consistent with his hands, but he's a guy who I think the Cowboys can develop and coach up and have him be that next receiving threat for them. And then day 3, I thought they did pretty well on day 3 with their picks. One pick in particular that I really liked for them was Jake Ferguson, tight end out of Wisconsin. I think, he's got good size, 6'5", 250. But he's a pretty good athlete too, a little bit better than he tested, I think. I think he's got pretty good lateral agility, stop-start ability as a route runner. But then when he gets the ball after the catch, one of the better run-after-catch tight ends in this class as well. And then he's a good blocker. He brings great effort as a blocker. So overall, I thought the NFC East did pretty good. I think the Eagles had the best draft out of them. And I'm not just trying to get brownie points.
Yeah, I know.
I do think the Eagles had the best draft. I think Washington and the Giants kind of sacrificed value at a couple spots. Then the Cowboys came in second, had a pretty solid draft overall. But again, Tyler Smith in round 1. I get it for the upside, but pretty big reach on my board.
All right, Ian, very specific last question, because John and I had fun with this, talking about it before the draft, and now you can put it into a little better perspective after the draft. We know it wasn't a good quarterback draft. Kenny Pickett goes first, only one in the first round, and then everybody drops all the way down till the 3rd round thereafter. We kind of debated a little bit, Malik Willis and Matt Corral. Both went in the 3rd round, surprisingly further down than both were expected, at least for mine. Didn't think either one was a first-round draft. And we said it will probably be dictated who's going to have the better NFL career by where they fall and who they land with. Malik Willis ends up in Tennessee, where I'm not a big Tannehill fan, so he can go in and compete, but Tannehill is at least a proven starter. Sam Darnold isn't even that in Carolina, where Matt Corral ended. Factoring in the players around them, the coaching staffs and the like, 4 years from now, 5 years from now, who's going to have accomplished more? Malik Willis in Tennessee or Matt Corral in Carolina?
It's a really tough question, man. It's very interesting because I think both quarterbacks were guys to me that have the upside, but also really lack the floor. You look at the tape for different reasons. I think Malik Willis, explosive athlete, very good arm for sure, elite creation capacity, but on tape, a lot of things they needs to work on. The field vision, the processing, the decision making, all pretty substandard. I would have liked to see more from him there. With Matt Corral, it's kind of different because the Ole Miss offense restricted him so much in 2021. A lot of RPO, a lot of one read throws. And when he was asked to go through his progressions and be a full field progression quarterback, that was where he really slowed up, did not progress from read to read very well. So I think with both of them, there's a lot to work on. And I think it's a realistic scenario that neither really breaks out as a full-time starter. So, it's a lot of projection for sure. Looking at the scenarios too, neither team is, I'm not super stoked about either situation for them. I think with the Panthers, they did improve the offensive line a little bit, getting Ikem Ekwonu, some really good day 3 picks as well there. But I do think with the Panthers, the receiving core, they got DJ Moore, they got a few guys there, but I would have liked to see more. I think Matt Corral, especially, he's a guy who, if you put him in right away, it might be rough just because he can't really progress very quickly. The mechanics can erode a little bit under pressure. And I'm still not in love with that offensive line. But with the Titans too, I don't love that offensive line either. I think they could have done a little bit more. Nicholas Petit-Frere was the guy that they got. I think if he starts right away, it could be trouble because he's kind of mechanically deficient right now. So there's questions for all of them. And also trading away A.J. Brown, getting Treylon Burks, obviously kind of makes up for the difference, but not nearly 100%. A.J. Brown is, I think, the far better player right now, and that tracks. But if I had to guess, I would say Malik Willis, just because I think Malik Willis has slightly better creation capacity. His frame is a little bit denser, right? So I think with him, and he's got a stronger arm as well. So I think the physical tools for me would probably weigh Malik Willis a little bit more. I do understand that Corral might have an opportunity to start a little bit earlier, but I think that can work just to his detriment because I don't think he's ready to start right away. So if he does start earlier than Willis, it might be something that, causes him to collapse and kind of break him. So I'm a little worried to see how it works out for both of them. But if I had to pick one, I think Malik Willis is in a situation that affords him a little more time to, sit and learn behind Ryan Tannehill. Maybe the Titans move on from Tannehill next year and move on to Willis. That would be a healthy situation for me. Whereas I can see a scenario for Corral where he's thrust into the starting role mid-season before he's ready. And, we've seen that break young quarterbacks before. I think you could argue it broke Sam Darnold, a few years ago. So one of those things where it's dangerous, it's precarious. But if I had to pick one, probably Malik Willis.
Ian, great stuff. We appreciated you coming on with us before the draft, certainly giving us the full 40 minutes today. We will be back in touch because before you know it, the Eagles are going to be looking at a quarterback in next year. No, I didn't say that. I'm a Jalen Hurts guy. I believe in Jalen Hurts. We'll see how it plays out. Ian, great stuff. Thank you much for hopping on with us. As often as you had the last month.
Thank you, Brad. It's always a pleasure to talk with you guys.
Thanks, Ian.
That is Ian Cummings from ProFootballNetwork.com. Good dude, and man, is he precise in his evaluation of these players.
Yeah. It's amazing. It's amazing. You bring up Reed Blankenship, and he's like, bang, bang, bang. Yeah. And he was tremendous. We had him on a couple times, as you mentioned. You had him on CBS as well, I believe. He's one of those up-and-coming draft guys, and I think – we have so many good ones. I don't want to say that because we have so many good ones, but I will say he is the best up and coming draft guy I've seen in many, many years.
He did a great job for us, and we thank him for it. We'll come back, continue to evaluate the Eagles draft. We've got our buddy Paul Domowitch, who's going to join us now in only about 15 minutes on Birds 365.